Trump he increases the level of Russian losses on the battlefield. He says that Russia had already lost almost 1 million soldiers. It's even more than we can hear from intelligence sources. So why does he picks such approach to President Putin to make this pressure? What result he is expecting from this kind of dialogue?
Well, as we know, that Trump never talks about anything halfway, right? So if he's going to say something, if he's going to make a claim, he will exaggerate. That is the nature of Donald Trump. With respect to what his goals are, I don't think it's especially clear. I do think ultimately Trump fancies himself a deal maker. And when you're making a deal with someone as intransigent as I don't want to say irrational, because I actually think Putin is rational, but someone, quite frankly, as evil, as difficult as Vladimir Putin, you are by definition going to have to put pressure on them. And so I think Trump sees himself in this instance as putting pressure on Vladimir Putin. The question that I think we should be asking is, how far is he willing to go with this pressure? Because we saw that President Biden was willing to say much more aggressive things, right? I mean, he called Putin a murderer. He spoke out unequivocally in defense of Ukraine and unequivocally against Russia. But then when it came time to actually act, he proved that he was unwilling or unable to take these strong, powerful actions that were necessary in order to push Russia back and ensure that Ukraine had everything it needed to win this war. Now, meanwhile, with Donald Trump, we have seen him being unwilling to say the same things that Joe Biden has said, right? President Trump is unwilling to say that Putin is a murderer. He's not going to be as direct as Biden was. But now, what remains to be seen is how aggressive will his actions be, right? Because like I mentioned earlier, Trump is not a particularly predictable character. And so here, that could be an opportunity in his favor, right? Where I think everyone kind of expects him to be softer on Putin. But if he comes out of the gate swinging and wants to show the world that he is, again, unpredictable, that he's strong, and that, even someone like Putin ultimately has to retreat under Donald Trump's ferocious negotiating prowess, that could actually be a positive development. So again, I think it's unclear. I think ultimately we shall see who within Trump's administration will have the greatest power as it relates to the Russia-Ukraine portfolio. So if Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, if Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, if they're the ones who have power, then I think we might actually see an American policy that is stronger than most people expected, and is willing to oppose and push back on Putin. But if, however, the power rests with people like Elon Musk or Tulsi Gabbard, the incoming Director of National Intelligence, then I think we will very well see a very different policy.
So we're standing on some kind of crossroad right now. Well, President Trump also mentioned the possible implementation of new sanctions against Russia. What might these sanctions be? What might these sanctions entail?
Well, look, I mean, we unfortunately have seen that American sanctions on Russia resemble Swiss cheese, right? With some holes that are big enough for trucks or, perhaps to continue the metaphor, tankers, Russian oil tankers to pass through. So, I think Biden in his final days before leaving office imposed, truly powerful sanctions that prevented the so-called shadow fleet, which is, about just under 200 Russian tankers from being able to operate worldwide. And these are ships that, had not essentially been registered appropriately, and so were able to slip through previous sanctions. And And, I do think that this was a not minor hit against Russia's oil economy. And so if Trump is willing to go even further, and again, further tighten sanctions regarding oil, if he's willing to implement perhaps even secondary sanctions, which is to say those sanctions which target countries which are trying to get around American sanctions on Russia. So that's one of the most effective ways that Russia's been able to evade our previous sanctions, is basically where they might previously have gotten goods directly from the U.S. Now they'll get those same goods just through a third-party country like Kazakhstan, or Azerbaijan or whatever, right? And so the more that we limit Russia's ability to do so, the more we limit its ability to continue this war. But right now, and by we I mean the collective West, are not in a very strong position. But we have an opportunity to strengthen that position. It truly boggles my mind a little bit that on the one hand we are willing to support Ukraine ultimately, right, and give billions of dollars in aid, military and humanitarian and budgetary, but at the same time we are also willing to continue trading with Russia to the tune of billions of dollars. So with the left hand we help Ukraine, and with the right hand we help the aggressor. That is a recipe for disaster. And we have to recognize that, and we have to be willing to incur some short-term trade costs in order to ultimately save money in the long term. Because the more money, the more opportunity we provide Putin to continue funding this war, the more ultimately Ukrainians will die. The more Western military aid will have to be sent, the more Western humanitarian aid will have to be sent, the more refugees will end up coming from Ukraine into Europe and beyond. And these are the exact things that not only Donald Trump, but other European leaders, including those leaders on the right who, will sometimes align with Vladimir Putin, that's in their interest, right? It's in their interest to ultimately be spending less money on this conflict and to have to deal with fewer refugees. But the only way to ensure that this happens is by continuing to tighten those sanctions on Russia. So again, whether or not Trump actually implements tougher sanctions, I think remains to be seen. We'll see if he tries to walk back any of the sanctions that Joe Biden implemented, although I don't think that will be easy, because I think a number of them will actually require congressional intervention. So, we'll see what Trump's willingness is. And again, if he is willing, then there are significant sanctions that the American president could implement. And I would say the first one that Donald Trump could do with the stroke of his pen is to confiscate the $5 billion in Russian assets that exist right now in the U.S. and give them to Ukraine. This has been something that my organization, the Renewed Democracy Initiative, has advocated for the last 2 to 3 years, and yet it has never been done. President Biden hasn't done it, even though he has spoken favorably about it. And so I think that if Donald Trump wanted to demonstrate his strength, that could be a very first powerful step that he could take alone.
And that could be definitely very painful for Kremlin and Putin's fellows. Well, Uriel, I also like to talk a little bit about Kit Kellogg's mission, the special envoy for the war in Ukraine from the President Trump. So the Wall Street Journal reports that Donald Trump has instructed the special envoy for the war in Ukraine, Kit Kellogg, to end the Russo-Ukrainian conflict within 100 days. Actually, however, Kellogg has never worked as a diplomat, so he probably won't be involved in any real negotiations with Russia. And I also will quote the Wall Street Journal in this place: Kellogg, like some of the Trump's other special envoys, was appointed despite his lack of relevant experience, according to the publication of the Wall Street Journal. So what will be General Kellogg's role in the negotiations with Russia? What does the 100-day deadline means? What does it mean for finding a path to peace in Ukraine?
We appear to have moved significantly beyond the original deadline, which Donald Trump promised during his campaign.
24 hours, yeah.
So 100 days, 24 hours, those are different numbers.
Pretty close.
That's right. So we've only changed 100x. As for what that actually means in practice, in truth, not much, right? Setting these arbitrary deadlines on, end this by this date or whatever, it's meaningless. And if we actually want to ensure that Western interests, that the interests of the free world, that American interests are protected, then we have to be willing to do whatever it takes